Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And when you do sign up for that, you get a weekly bonus episode that's just a rundown of everything else that I'm watching that week. And also, lately, we've been covering The Mandalorian. So there's extra interviews there where I have a guest every week and we cover each episode. So we're in season 2 right now. And I want to take a moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Chris Balga, Michael Cross, Philip Barker, and Ricardo Alvarez. Thank you so much for everything that you guys do. And I've got a new guest with me here today. I've got Robert. Say hi, Robert.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, it's going good. So Robert, you are new to the show, so why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
All right. My name is Robert Goodrick. I'm kind of a geek, and I've known Lisa for a couple years now through some of the costume and cosplay things. I'm also part of a local circus troupe, trained as a clown and a stilt walker. I have a wife and son, and I love them both dearly.
Yay. My guest always picks the movie. What movie did you want to talk about today?
Today we're going to talk about Jim Henson's first movie, The Muppet Movie.
Yep, back in 1979. Um, Tell me a little bit of your history with this movie. Like, when did you first see it?
Okay, I was 2 when it came out. My parents told me that I was at the theater, but I don't really remember much of that. I remember mostly watching the Muppet Movie and some of the other Muppet movies, Great Muppet Caper, Muppets Take Manhattan, at my grandpa's house. He lived about 2 blocks away from us, and I would go over there, and I wore out all of his VHS tapes of the Muppet movies. So that was kind of where my
Yeah.
first memory was. And then I've gotten to see it in theater multiple times. So it is one of my
Nice.
favorites.
Yeah, I'm glad you picked this one because I think it also depends on when you became a Muppet fan. Like earlier this last year, actually, we talked about the Muppet Christmas Carol, and that was, for my cousins that are a little bit younger than me, that was one of the first Muppet movies they had
Mm-hmm.
seen. Um, and then for me, I think it was the Great Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan era. So this is like, the first one before that. So it kind of depends on where you are in your Muppet journey. I know that I've seen this movie more than once because as we were watching it, I quoted lines, but I was surprised by how not familiar. It wasn't quite as familiar as The Great Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan, but I know that I saw it because I knew all the songs like instinctively.
Oh yeah.
Like as soon as they start playing, I'm like, oh, I love this one, Rainbow Connection.
Oh yeah. The
So I know
music's
I've
amazing.
yeah, and I was actually texting my dad last night because he's a big Muppet fan. He's kind of who got me into the Muppets, and I was telling him the movie, and he kept trying to guess the plot, and he kept saying different Muppet movies, and I kept having to say, "No, I think it's the first one." And so he was like, "I need to just go back and watch it." Luckily, all these are on Disney Plus, and you can watch them right now if you have a Disney Plus account. So it's a good time to catch up on the Muppets. Before we go too much further, I do want to stress that this is not spoiler free. I don't know how important that is in a Muppet movie, but we will be giving spoilers. So if you want to see it first, you can and stop here and come back. But if you're this far, I'm going to read the synopsis really quick. After Kermit the Frog decides to pursue a movie career, he starts his cross country trip from Florida to California. Along the way, he meets and befriends Fozzie Bear, Miss Piggy, Gonzo, and a rock musician, Dr. Teeth, and the Electric Mayhem. When Kermit is offered a job by Doc Hopper to advertise the fried frog legs at his restaurant chain, Kermit turns Hopper down. However, Hopper refuses to relent and pursues Kermit and his companions till a final showdown. An epic first Muppet movie plot. Yeah, like I said, when I was watching it again, I was like, I was thinking about all the moments that were like about to happen with the frog legs and the kind of Colonel Sanders looking guy.
Yeah,
It's very interesting.
Charles Durning did an amazing job as the antagonist in this, as Doc Hopper.
Yeah, he really did, and his sidekick too.
Oh yeah,
I
Austin
like them
Pendleton
both.
is a funny guy, and it's funny how the relationship between the two, where Max is just desperately trying to make Doc Hopper happy, and all of a sudden he has this change of heart halfway through and goes, "Wait, we're not right with this."
Yeah, he's like, wait, frogs have feelings. This isn't cool. It definitely, as a kid, made me really just disgusted by the idea of frog legs. I was like,
Well,
that's Kermit. I think
and
it came from this movie specifically.
it's funny because, like, for me, it was, you know, Kermit was offered something. Doc Hopper offered him something, but it was something lesser than his actual dream. And he's
For
like,
sure.
I could do this, but I've got this dream that's so much bigger than what you're asking me. And that's kind of driven, like that was kind of ingrained in me at a young age. Don't worry about the lesser things, but really try and pursue those things that you really dream about. So
Right. I think, he was offered surface level fame, but fame wasn't even something that Kermit was that interested in.
it's true.
He was he was interested in, making when he talks to Dom DeLuise in the film, Dom DeLuise says something like, "You'll make a lot of people happy." Like he says fame, and then he says secondarily, "You'll make people happy. You'll put smiles on people's faces," something like that. And Kermit that's what lights him up. He's like, "Oh, that's what I want to do. That's my purpose." So yeah, it's like the Frog Legs campaign is sort of a selling your soul to Hollywood and literally like selling out. And so that's just not what Kermie's about. So I like that part of the movie too. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to read off a couple of quick facts that I wrote down. And some of these are ones that I'd kind of heard in the past and just thought that they were interesting. Number one, Jim Henson spent an entire day in a 50-gallon steel drum submerged in a pond for the opening sequence of Kermit the Frog in the Swamp. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to think about they're puppeteers, and it's like, man, this is a true labor of love for them.
Oh yeah.
That does not sound fun.
Well, and originally it was supposed to be Kermit on a lily pad, that traditional frog on a lily pad. And then they realized,
Oh,
well,
yeah.
if we put him on a log, then Jim will have a little bit more room to breathe and move around and things. So,
Right, and the audience isn't gonna question that. I wasn't like, "Hey, he should be on a lily pad."
yeah, yeah,
So it's like it kind of made sense. The illusion of Fozzie driving the Studebaker was achieved by having a little person drive the car via remote control from the trunk, using a television monitor to guide his steering. The puppeteers would lie on the seat floor and not see a thing. The first time they tested it, the television monitor went on the blink, and the driver had to be talked through the scene by an assistant director on a walkie-talkie, like giving them direction, like little to the left, little to the right.
yeah.
Something I hadn't thought of, I think I used to, like, think that maybe there was someone in the Fozzie Bear costume for those scenes, but I love that they stuck with, like, no, this is, like, staying a puppet the whole time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's funny because in the Studebaker they have that traditional, like, what's called a nose bullet, and that's where they actually had the camera, was way up at the front of the car. So
Ah.
whenever they're filming, like, they could have a camera basically mounted on the front of the car to see, for the driver in the trunk to see. So yeah, the
Yeah.
practical effects in this movie were like cutting edge things.
Yeah. I was thinking about watching it last night that they did so much with puppets, which is not something it's not like there's like a huge field of people doing things with puppets, but in a way that's kind of unfortunate because they come up with so many creative things in this movie
Oh
that are
yeah.
so difficult to do. Jim Henson was determined to use the larger budget of a feature film, to push the technological limits
Yeah, yeah.
and capabilities of puppetry. And one of the most difficult feats, and this is one that I've heard all my life, was the Kermit riding a bicycle, which they up the ante,
Oh
I think, in
yeah.
the next film where everyone's on a bicycle, but they said it was like so difficult they like don't want to talk about it, and it remained a secret for a long time because it just looks so impressive, and is difficult to do. But
Yeah.
I love those scenes.
Originally they had the bike on remote control, and they could drive the bike on remote control. But whenever they added Kermit, they couldn't get it to like they couldn't get the balance right, and so they
Mm.
ended up doing monofilament off of a crane, and that's how they actually achieved that. But yeah, then they could go on to Muppets Take Manhattan with all the bikes and moving in circles because in this movie, he moves in a straight line, and so the crane just kind of moves him down the way. But they're actually doing circles and things like that in Muppets Take Manhattan. So
Yeah, it's, like, unbelievable and looks really complicated. Um, and yeah, I just like those scenes, and so I always think of that. I always used to tell people about that particular scene, in Muppets Take Manhattan, so wanted to include it here since this was the first time. This movie was directed by James Frawley. I think that Henson wanted to direct it himself, but I guess they ultimately decided to have a director also.
yeah, because it's again the first feature length film, and so Jim was like, "Well, I know how to do a show. I know how to do short scenes, but let's have so I need another set of eyes since this is such a big endeavor, and there's so many more moving parts."
Right, because it's a technological undertaking with the puppetry in and of itself, but then to add on that a plot and, pacing and everything else, yeah, probably a good call. Um, so, the next part that I want to talk about a little bit, well, first of all, I want to say there's like 1,000 amazing cameos I forgot about in this movie. Probably because I was a child and didn't realize who these people were,
Oh yeah.
and I wanna get to them, but I think probably the best way to is if we talk about some of your favorite scenes, because I guarantee they'll be in some of those.
Oh yeah.
So, go ahead and, kinda start us off. What are some of your favorite scenes from the movie?
I think my favorite, like hands down, my favorite scene is the El Sleazo whenever he first meets Fozzie. James. The first thing, James Coburn comes flying out of the door, and he says, "This is the roughest, roughest place, whatever." And they're like, "Have you talked to the owner?" And he's like, "I am the owner." And that kind of sets the
I
scene
love
for
that line.
it sets the scene for, okay, we're about to walk into this place, and it may be a little rough, but then you walk in and it's all the stereotypical ruffians that you've ever thought about, and you have, like Madeline Kahn hits on Kermit,
Yeah.
Tilly Savalas turns and goes, "Hey, are you hitting on my lady?" And then and throughout the scene, there's puns. Paul Williams is playing piano. I mean, it's just a beautiful. I feel like that scene in particular is just magic.
I agree. I think that in a lot of kids' movies and they try to have some really cool cameos, but there's just like a extra layer, and I think in the Muppet movies, it's kind of the same vibe, I think, from, like, the Looney Tunes cartoons and films in that it's, like, genuinely funny. It's not funny, like and then, like, giving you, like, one little cameo, "Oh, these are for the parents." Like, the lines in the movie are actually funny. They let, like, the comedians and stars that they invite on bring their actual humor to the screen, and I think it shows, and there's always been that third wall in these Muppet movies too of like being aware of Hollywood and like being famous and like
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know, there's something to all that we don't get as much in like newer kids projects that I guess just because I was raised with it, that's kind of my favorite, you know?
And then there's like Carol Kane with the running joke of myth, yes, or like the Hare Krishna jokes, or the, just kind of this humor that kind of runs throughout, the things that call back to earlier in the movie. So,
Yeah, for sure, and it's, like, current pop culture stuff too. And I like the newer Muppet films, I just think that these I mean, they were just, like it was amazing the people that they could get and, like, the stuff that they could get away with, saying, and I don't know, it's just special. My favorite movies were those that did that.
oh yeah.
What's another scene that you really liked?
Um, the beauty pageant scene, I thought it was really funny that they used Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy as the judges, because you're looking at a different type of puppetry. Actually, you're looking at ventriloquism, where Edgar is talking to Charlie, and Charlie is a ventriloquist dummy that's sitting there on his lap, and yet it still fit in this world, fit into the
Mhm.
way the movie flowed. And again, you have, Bob Hope, Richard Pryor, some other big name people showing up, in that scene. And the, the, how can I say this? The beauty of language where Kermit says something and Piggy hears something else and makes this decision to drop everything and follow him, even though
Yeah,
that's not what he meant, and
and yeah. That definitely sums up their relationship too in all the movies where it's like Kermit's interested, but I mean, it's almost like Mrs. Piggy's in another relationship in every movie. Like she's 10 times more in love and convinced that they're meant to be together, and that's kind of a through line through all the films.
well, and it's funny because she clings to him, but then like, oh, the agent calls. Oh, gotta go. And it's like
Yeah.
she has this trouble balancing, her desire for Kermit versus her desire for fame, when ultimately, if she just followed him, she could be famous.
Yeah. And she will be. Yeah, I like that scene too. I think for me, one of my favorite ones is when they're in the restaurant on that date. uh,
With Steve Martin as the waiter. Yeah.
yes. Yeah, and I was like especially watching that scene now, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I must have not watched this movie since I was really little because I didn't realize he was in this." And, the whole bit is very funny to begin with, but I also like how, he pours the champagne for them. Well, he acts like it's really fancy, but then it's just like a little pop top,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and then he pours them some, and then he's like, "Do you wanna try it, sir?" And he says, "Well, why don't you try?" He tries it for them. I don't know, just all of that is really fun. It's a very cute scene.
Yeah.
It's hard for me not to mention scenes like what are my favorite cameos, like, that's specifically what I think of, like, I like the part that Mel Brooks is in too.
Oh yeah. I mean, and it kind of set the stage as far as Muppet movies go, where all of a sudden in Great Muppet Caper, in Muppets Take Manhattan, you have cameos, you have puns, you have the breaking of the fourth wall. Like in this movie, whenever they first meet Dr. Teeth in the Electric Mayhem, they say, you can't tell the whole story, and they're like, oh well, why don't you read the screenplay? That kind of fourth wall,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
where but uh, as a clown performer, that's my bread and butter, where I discover something and then I share it with the audience, through that fourth wall stuff, and I'm
Right,
like,
right.
wow, this fits right. Like I never realized how seminal this movie was for me, as far as like my humor, my performing style, things like that. Like both this movie and all the Muppet Show, and just the Muppets all around.
Yeah, I think that that fourth wall stuff that you're talking about, the emphasis on comedy is like but I don't wanna say real I'm not trying to be like elitist real comedy, but, comedians like Mel Brooks. Um, and that kind of connection that's also in Looney Tunes where they always you know, there was a lot of fourth wall breaking there too, and they made a lot of current jokes, and I was always drawn to that over some of the other stuff, like over Hanna-Barbera or like, other things that didn't have that element to them, so totally agree. I think that definitely shaped maybe my humor in general, and it came from the Muppets, and I guess I didn't never thought about it that way.
Muppets, Looney Tunes,
Um,
Animaniacs, yeah.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Um, it's I don't know, it's really special, and I wonder well, so I was gonna ask you this, in terms of this movie, did they does the Muppet Show come before or after this movie?
The Muppet Show was started in '77, I believe, and so and it's funny because first season you had like Paul Williams was a guest in the first season,
Ah, okay.
who because Paul Williams, he's playing the piano at El Ciso, but he and Kenny Asher wrote all of the music for this.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
and
Cool.
like so Paul Williams, amazing songwriter, has been, tons of people have played his music before, and you know, close personal friend with Jim, and Jim was like, "I need you to write this song, Rainbow Connection. This is like going to be the song, basically, that people, love." And Paul like hit it out of the park. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
I,
I
I,
like get
I,
misty-eyed when I hear that song
I, I,
to this
I
day.
I only say that because we used it as a waltz for our wedding.
Aw, that's so nice. That's awesome.
At the
Yeah,
beginning,
I mean, that's go ahead, sorry.
you asked me, like where this has popped up in my life, the waltz at the wedding, but also my birthday cake for my 40th birthday was Animal popping out of the top of the saloon. Like that was the
Oh,
cake.
that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, and you're right about the music, like, there's so many good songs to the point where, like I said before, I remembered the songs more than the movie, and that's not, like, saying taking anything away from the movie. I saw the movie when I was really little, but the songs have stuck with me since then, and you hear them again, like, they've come up again in pop culture, specifically Rainbow Connection, um,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's just so well done. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
I was wondering about their connection with the show just because, I mean, they're sort of pitching this movie as like this is how they got together. So I was like, was this before or after? But that makes sense. It's after the show had been like established enough to where they get the budget to make a movie.
Yeah.
And they probably had no idea how many movies they were going to make. One quick thing I wanted to mention too is in the episode that we did on the Muppets Christmas Carol, my cousin Kurt mentioned that that was like the first one that didn't have a Sesame Street cameo, and this one has Big Bird in it, and I
Had
hadn't
it
thought of it that way, but it's like yeah, they always threw them in. I don't know if that's because I always got the impression with the Muppets that like Sesame Street was kind of like what started him off, how he got famous, and then the Muppets vibe is kind of more him and like what he wanted to do. And so, but studios maybe always want them to throw the Sesame Street back in there because people like Sesame Street so much.
well, and diverging from the movie, Sesame Street like is even bigger than the Muppets itself. I mean,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Sesame Street is viewed around the world. I mean, it was kind of one of those things where Jim was like, "We need education. How can we, educate kids? How can I help?" You know, and
Mhm.
so yeah, I mean, moving from Sesame Street into the Muppet Show itself, the Muppet Show was primetime television. So it wasn't even
Yeah.
necessarily meant to be a kids show because there was definitely content in it that was not, wasn't necessarily kid appropriate. I mean, it flew over our heads back when we were kids, but it was meant to be a variety show for adults done with Muppets.
Right. And I felt like there was always a push for that. Like we did an episode on Dark Crystal too, and that kind of
Mm.
came up again of like, Jim Henson really wanting to go in like a more serious direction with puppets. Not that he didn't like Sesame Street or the Muppets, but that, there was more that could be done. It didn't always have to be the main focus. And on children's programming. There's
Yeah.
obviously nothing wrong with children's programming. It's great, but he just wanted to do more stuff. He's an artist.
Yeah.
And
Muppets
so
aren't just for kids.
yeah, it's kind of like how I feel about animation. I'm like, animation isn't only one thing, it's many things. So I just like his philosophy because you could apply that to puppets, and I agree. I like all the different projects that they've done with them. Um, yeah, so we haven't talked yet about the Electric Mayhem a whole lot. We touched on them,
Oh.
but it's interesting to go back and watch this. This came out in 1979, and that was another really cool thing about Sesame Street and the Muppets is they're very like of the time that they came about in. So like it's very hippies, very 70s. And that's cool cuz again, artists made these puppets and they're kind of imbuing their own vibe. And also I just think the Electric Mayhem's costumes on the puppets is like they're like so cool. Like I love
Oh
Dr.
yeah.
Teeth in particular.
Well, I love Dr. Teeth, but what's really funny is you have Floyd, who is actually named Floyd Pepper, and his
Ah,
costume is an homage to the Beatles' Sergeant
right.
Pepper.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You
And I
know.
love like their voices too, like
Oh yeah.
Floyd and what's the name of the girl puppet?
Janice.
Janice.
Like
Yeah.
wow. Yeah.
Perfect name, sort of Janis Joplin-ish. And yeah,
Zoot.
oh, what's his name? Zoot?
Zoot, the sax player, who's just
Oh, that's right.
kind of out there, and then of course Animal.
Yes,
Can't forget
Animal.
Animal.
I loved Animal when I was a little kid.
Well, and it's funny because Animal is one of the like he's in the band, he's in Electric Mayhem, but kind of throughout the movies and throughout the show, he's like the band member that gets to be one of the regular characters as well.
Yes, that's true. Even though he's just yells things. He becomes very important as the franchise goes on.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
but I like that. I love the van that they, drive in,
Oh
and you
yeah.
see that a lot in the movies as well, but I don't know, I just really have always enjoyed the band and, like, their design, and so
I
that's one
love
of my
that
favorite parts of the movies too.
in that scene. I think it's funny. They're like, "Well, let's camouflage the car," and it's not that they paint it one solid color so it doesn't look like this Studebaker. They go all out and just go insane with colors and rainbows and swirls and and it's so bizarre, and yet they accept it. It's like, oh
Yeah,
yeah,
they're
this
like
works. You know.
and then they're immediately spotted the second they start driving it,
Right,
which I
right.
was
But along with that, they pull in front of a sign, and oh, they're camouflaged in front of this specific spot.
oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's in another part of the film, but I always, as a kid, greatly enjoyed the fork in the road joke
Oh
too.
yeah,
There's a fork
uh,
in the road. Although I don't think I knew what a fork in the road was. I just liked seeing a giant fork. See, that tells
yeah.
you that at the
Well,
time.
and it's funny because throughout the movie, there's puns, here and there. Like at one point, they're driving, and Kermit's looking at the map. He's like, "Bear left," and Fozzie goes, "Frog right."
Oh, yeah,
It's
that's
like,
right. Oh, Fozzie.
oh, Fozzie.
I've always loved his, like, failed comedy stand-up.
Oh
It's the
yeah,
best. That's another thing that's, like, borderline adult concept for children to understand, like, a failed comedian, like, how many comedians are they watching? Like, but I love that about him. Oh, and we haven't talked about Gonzo yet.
oh, Gonzo the Great,
Gonzo's
the
great.
plumber who's going to go to India to be famous.
Yeah,
And
that
I think it's funny because he's like, "Oh, I'm going to go to India to be famous," and they're like, "Well, why wouldn't you go to Hollywood?" He's like, "Well, if you want to do it the easy way, like Hollywood's easy, you know."
right. He could go be a star in Bollywood. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's options. Yeah, but I like, I've always liked Gonzo's obsession with what's his chicken's name?
Camilla.
Camilla, that's right. Yeah, he always has Camilla, even in Muppet Babies. Um, I was saying last night on Twitter that growing up, he was one of my favorite characters, but I was always like aware of how weird everyone keeps saying he is in the movies and the cartoons. And so I was always like, I really like this character and I feel like I identify with him, but everyone says he's a weirdo. Like, what does that say about me?
Well,
I thought about it way too hard as a kid.
I actually did a costume a few years ago where I did a mashup of Gonzo and Han Solo, a Gon Solo, if you will.
Love it.
So yeah,
Yeah, he's
Gonzo
cool.
definitely. I identify with him. Well, I mean, I identify with all of the Muppets in different ways, but yeah, Gonzo's got this special spot where it's like, okay, everybody, thinks he's a little different, but aren't we all a little different,
Right, he's always part of the team and they accept him. And I think for me, I was saying last night that my two favorites have always been Gonzo and Kermit. They're like two halves for me of like, I guess how I view myself if I had to put myself in the Muppet universe. Because Kermit, he's like a really different kind of protagonist where he's the main character, but he doesn't emphasize himself at all. He always makes sure that he's taking care of like everybody else in the little group first.
Yeah,
And he mentions that even in this film. And I don't know. That's what I've always liked about the Muppets too. Is like they're a little team, and they're not even similar. They're all really different, but somehow they all cohesively go together.
right. I love his line where they're in the desert. There's the fire, and he kind of steps away for a moment, and he says, "I didn't promise anybody anything." And then he thinks about it. He's like, I did promise myself.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, and it's one of those things where, for me, in my life, I feel that because I don't necessarily make a lot of promises to people about things, but then I think, well, what did I promise for me? What dream am I putting aside for now? What do I
Mhm.
need to re-examine in me?
Right, right. Yeah. There's a lot of emphasis on like working together, lifting everybody else up, and I like that in all these Muppet films. Like as fun and silly as they are, they always have like a pretty good message.
Yeah.
Um, what other scenes have we not talked about yet that you wanted to cover?
Um, man,
I know there's so many. A lot of them are like
Sweetums,
one-liner, so it's kind
Sweet,
of hard.
Sweetums showing up, and
Oh,
uh,
I love Sweetums. I feel like
uh,
that's a character you don't see a lot anymore.
yeah, when Milton Berle's like, "Oh, this is my Jack," and they're like, "Hey, Jack," he's like, "Jack, not name, Jack Job," and then like they take off, and he's trying to follow them throughout the movie, and finally bursts through at the end, and it's like, okay, he's finally here. But I mean, there's so many scenes that I'm just like little things here and there. The song between Kermit and Rolf.
Oh yeah.
It's funny because that one, it was one of those things where when I was a kid, I didn't really get it. I didn't
Mhm.
always understand, and then all of a sudden, as an adult, I've watched it and I'm like, wow. And they I'll wait till something better comes along, and yeah, they're talking about girls, but it's almost this theme throughout the movie where Kermit was offered something at the beginning, but he's got a bigger dream. Oh, I didn't make
Oh,
promises to
true.
anybody, but I did promise myself, oh, we'll wait till something better comes along. It's and then at the end, whenever some of the last lines is, life's like a movie, write your own ending, keep believing, keep pretending. We've
Hmm.
done just what
Yeah.
we've set out to do. And it's this lovely theme of, if you follow your dreams, you can achieve them, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that is very true. I don't know if we've talked about the standoff yet, but I
Oh,
enjoyed that.
between Snake and Kermit in the
Yes.
and then Animal bursting out of the top of the saloon.
Yeah, I also like that, the bad guy is like, "I hired like, frog killing expert," or whatever he
Yeah,
calls it. Like,
a
I love
frog
how
killer.
obscure
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, I love how obscure and dumb that is, but it definitely sounds a lot like a plot in some of those movies where they, hire the expert or whatever and have them come out, so
Well,
I
and the interesting thing about Snake in that is that he looks so different from all the other humans. Like his gun is what looks like a spear gun, but it shoots like giant forks, you know,
Right.
kind of like just so different. So obviously this guy is the expert, you know.
Yeah, so specialized. Forks are the natural enemy of frogs, I guess. But yeah, man. Yeah, I know what you mean about there's so many it's hard to pick one scene because a lot of them are like bits that are set up and then they're over. They're not like it's not like a typical movie where, there's definitely a through line and a plot, but it's like there's all these tiny little moments. And don't worry,
Yeah,
I won't go through every single moment. We'd be here all day, but yeah. I know we mentioned Dom DeLuise at the beginning, but I wanted to mention him one more time just because we just did All Dogs Go to Heaven and he was in that.
oh,
So
well, there you go.
it's itchy. So I don't think kids nowadays would have any idea who that is,
No.
but you know, there was a time when those Don Bluth films were really big and Dom DeLuise was in all of them.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's
Can't I don't know if you ever saw Cannonball Run. Dom
mm-mm.
DeLuise and Burt Reynolds.
Oh,
It was a
need to check
race movie, like a cross country race
that.
movie.
Oh,
Go ahead and look into
yeah.
those. Those were that would like when I think Dom DeLuise, that's where I am because he like in the movies he's like this kind of normal guy, but then he has like this almost superhero alter ego as well. So that is just really funny.
Okay, I need to check that out. I feel like that's like maybe just right before my time, and
Oh
that's
yeah.
why I haven't seen it. But yeah, it's like, and whenever we talk about movies like this, I think about that. I'm like, oh man, like, your son probably has seen all these Muppet movies, right? Because
Oh
you're
yeah.
married. Yeah. So he has that benefit of being raised by someone who's a big Muppet fan. But I wonder, like, how much in the collective kids' pop culture consciousness are the Muppets anymore? They were
Well,
so
I
huge
mean,
when I was.
with the research, when Jason Segel, did
That's true.
Disney's
Yeah.
The Muppets, and then uh, Muppets Most Wanted, it's come back, it's come back into the cultural norm, and Disney Plus actually has a new Muppet television show that they're working on. That's kind of
Oh, good.
it's funny because it's like watching a Zoom call among all the Muppets.
Really? Okay. I remember when they tried to like relaunch Muppets Tonight and
Yeah.
it didn't really take off, which made me so sad because I used to watch on like the Disney Channel, I think is where they showed it, like older episodes of the older show. And so I was kind of hoping that would come back the same way and it didn't. It might just be that that was like a moment and TV's just progressed to a point where you can't really do that anymore. But a Zoom call, I mean, that's pretty current.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. No, I'll have to check that out. All right. Well, are we missing anything else that you wanted to cover?
I want to talk a little bit like outside of the movie,
Oh, for sure.
like the art of the poster.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
the art of the poster was done by Drew Struzan, which he's done poster art for forever. It seems like in Hollywood, and his art uh, is such that he really captures characters, and it's funny because he's the only one that's done movie posters for the Muppets.
Oh, really?
That
That's
was
interesting.
that was one thing that Jim said. Whenever he chose Drew Struzan, whenever Drew brought the art, he goes, "Wow, you have captured these characters so well. You're the only one I ever want to do these posters."
He treats them like they're people, like the way that they're posed and
Oh yeah,
the way they're emoting.
absolutely.
I mean, it's like they're puppets, so they can only emote as much as their face can change, but he doesn't change it more than they do, I think. Maybe that's part of what he was talking about, like
Yeah,
keeping them puppets, but giving them life at the same time.
right.
I'm sure it's really hard to do in a drawing.
So I think and it's funny in the poster because I mean there's the homage in the film, but in the poster there's like this Gone with the Wind thing between Kermit and Piggy,
Yes.
and it's like okay, and it's almost this callback to old Hollywood, and very much that feeling of just those drawn posters that are just so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because nowadays it's all photos and editing and things like that, which is great too. But those hand drawn art is, like I said, just beautiful.
Yeah, it's nostalgic and it's how all movie posters were at one time. So it's like
Yeah,
really
yeah.
fun to see that. And there's a lot of attention to detail. It's treated like a real movie, which it is, but it's treated seriously, I guess, in that poster. So I like that a lot too. Um, yeah. I know it's like hard to I'm always afraid that I'm gonna end the recording and then like later in the middle of the night I'm like, oh no, I forgot this and this. Which has happened. But
That's
that's why I
fun.
want to give you the opportunity just in case I forget anything.
Okay, let's
Um,
see. We talked about the
yeah.
car. We talked about the bike. We talked about the poster.
I mean,
Uh,
it's not a super long movie, and that's another thing too. It's like
yeah, it's like
for
90
kids'
minutes,
movies,
like hour and
yeah,
a
it's
half.
like you can only talk about it for so long, and then you're like, "Oh, it's over." We talked about all of it, so no shame there. Let's see. Yeah, no, I think well, let me ask you this. So this one's your favorite one, you said, right? Out of all the Muppet movies?
I I go back and forth between this one and Muppets Take Manhattan. Like
That's a good
those I kind of oscillate between those two, and I've easily seen both of them 100 times. I don't know.
Yeah, same. I remember, especially as a kid, like I said before, I watched The Great Muppet Caper and then Muppets Take Manhattan. So much so that they've kind of turned into one movie in my mind. Like when
Gotcha.
I try to remember what happened in one movie, I have this problem with Indiana Jones too, but these movies as well, where I'm like saying a scene, but that was in the other one. They're both just like really good films. And so those are probably my two favorites, with Muppet Christmas Carol being like probably the third
Hmm.
favorite, but it's difficult because they're all good. I mean, none of them are like terrible. So I enjoy all of them. But yeah, I was wondering which one was your favorite. Um, let's see. Yeah, I think we talked about the show. We talked about
Cloris Leachman and Orson Welles. Orson Welles plays Lou Lord, who is like the big movie producer that they're going to see.
oh, that's
But
right.
before they even get in the door, they meet Cloris Leachman, who's his assistant, and they sneak in by her because of her animal allergy.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's like, okay, this is ridiculous. And she just opens the door. And you go from this super funny moment at that, and then like they walk in, and there's Orson Welles behind the desk, and he turns around, and you're just like, oh, now we're serious, And it's just this interesting contrast between just those two interactions, and you almost you almost expect, like, why are you here? What have you cut? But instead, it's, oh, you were looking for, you were looking for performers for frogs for, whatever, and then arrange the rich and famous contract. It's like it wasn't even a discussion.
Yeah,
It's
it's
like,
much like the ad in the beginning of the movie that Dom DeLuise shows him, where he's like, "Look," and it's like he reads the ad, and it's like frogs that want to be famous and can dance, and sing should come here. It's like very direct.
and it's funny because along with this theme that I've been talking about this whole time, they could have walked in there. He could have turned around. They could have gotten intimidated and went like, never mind. But they took the step to say,
Mhm.
this is why we're here. And if they
Yeah.
hadn't, as we say in improv, if they hadn't said yes, there wouldn't have been that next. They wouldn't have succeeded.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And plus, it's just awesome that
Oh
it's
yeah.
Orson Welles
Oh
and
yeah.
Cloris Leachman. Like both those people are, awesome, and it's crazy that they can get them in this movie. It just goes to show like how popular the Muppets were at the time.
Oh yeah.
Well, I guess that brings me to my last couple of questions for you. Um, what is it about this movie that you love so much? I know we've been talking about that, but if you had to summarize, why do you like this movie so much in particular, and why have you seen it so many times?
Again, it takes me back to my childhood. Sitting with my grandpa and watching these movies. Again, it's a lot about that form of humor that I really really enjoy. And like I said, that overarching theme of just following your dreams.
Yeah, I think yeah, everything you said is great. I really enjoyed this one because I love the Muppets, and I also like their brand of humor. I like that it can be, really over the top at times, but there's also a lot of dry humor, and dry humor is something that I like a lot. They're just good lines. I mean, good
Yeah.
one-liners that all the characters have, and great puns. Um, and it's nostalgic. It also grew up watching these films, and I love that they never lost that kind of 70s vibe, no matter how many times they get updated. They update the characters, but they keep that look and that vibe that is so Jim Henson.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I really appreciate that about it. If you had to pitch this movie to someone, like let's pretend you run into someone and they've never seen the Muppets, and how would you pitch this movie to them?
Ooh. Hmm.
You're like, this is a strange alternate universe where they've somehow never heard of them.
Well, and it's funny. It's funny because as far as strange alternate universes, you're also pitching a strange alternate universe where you have to
Yeah,
have a suspension of reality where well, you have talking frogs and bears and dogs and things like that.
yeah.
And if I were to pitch it, it's
It's weird because that's another unique thing about these movies is they coexist with like the real world simultaneously. There's not really like a line, and
yeah,
they don't really talk about that. There's not like 200 years ago Muppets this and this happened and that's how they became part of our reality. It's like no, they've
yeah,
always been part of our reality in these movies. That's
yeah.
true.
Well, and it's funny because they don't even like. There's one time in Muppet history that they have acknowledged that there's something else going on. Uh,
Mhm.
they did a tribute special right after Jim died, and it was the Muppets. Like I said, tribute to Jim Henson, and they're like, "Who's Jim Henson? Who's Jim Henson?" And at one point, they go, "Oh wait, I think I remember him. He's that guy that walks around down there sometimes." And it's
Oh, gotcha. That's
this
hilarious.
just that one moment where they acknowledge there's something else going on, but we owe everything to that.
Oh, I like that. Yeah. Yeah, I guess
So
I mean, I would say, that this Muppet movie is the Muppets are puppets for sure, and they're kind of directed at kids, but there's enough humor and there's enough there for like adults to watch them too. And it's just a really fun like nostalgic ride.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean,
Okay, I've got
maybe
I've
that
got my
gets someone
pitch.
in the door. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I've got my pitch. If you're willing to go on a ride and use your imagination a little bit, then you're gonna have a good time.
Yep, totally agree. And as I said before, you can watch all of them right now on Disney Plus, so you don't have an excuse. Um, but yeah, thank you so much, Robert, for coming on and talking about this. I think you need to think of some other movies in the future so that I can have you back. They can be Muppet movies; they don't have to be, but you definitely should come back.
Okay,
Yeah, have a good one.
you too.